In the late autumn of 1871, when the hills of southern Missouri turned the color of rusted iron and the wind moved through the trees like a living thing, travelers began speaking in low voices about a stretch of road that cut through the Ozark wilderness. It was not marked on most maps, only a pale scar of wagon ruts and hoof prints pressed into stubborn earth, but it connected two growing settlements and saved nearly a day's ride for anyone brave enough to take it. Brave, or desperate, because along that lonely passage stood a cabin with a hand-painted sign that read, "Water and rest for the weary." The cabin belonged to two brothers, Caleb and Silas Harlan. They had come to the Ozarks after the war, like many men who returned with hollow eyes and no clear place to belong. People said they were quiet but polite, strong-backed and capable with tools. They built their home near a natural spring that bubbled cold and clean from limestone rock, then dug a deeper well beside it, reinforcing the mouth with thick-cut timber. To passing riders, it must have seemed like a blessing dropped in the wilderness, a place where a horse could drink, a traveler could fill his canteen, and tired bones could rest by a warm fire. At first, no one questioned their generosity. The Ozarks could be merciless, and hospitality was often the difference between life and death. Peddlers carrying bolts of cloth, veterans searching for work, widows traveling to distant kin, even the occasional preacher, all found their way to the Harlan cabin. The brothers asked for no money. "Water's the Lord's gift," Caleb would say with a faint smile. "We only draw it up." Silas, thinner and sharper in the face, rarely spoke more than necessary, but he kept the stew pot simmering and the lanterns trimmed. The disappearances did not begin all at once. They arrived like small cracks in glass, easy to miss unless you were looking closely. A mule found wandering without its owner. A wagon discovered tipped along a ravine, goods intact but no driver in sight. Letters that never reached their destinations. In a land where bandits, wild animals, and sudden illness were common explanations, people shrugged and moved on. The wilderness swallowed the careless every year. But by the spring of 1872, the names began to collect in a way that felt wrong. Thomas Reed, a tinsmith from Rolla, last seen heading south with a satchel of earnings. Margaret Bell, traveling alone after her husband's death, determined to join her sister near the Arkansas line. A pair of brothers driving cattle west. Each had been known to take the shortcut through the hills. Each had told someone, at some point, that they would stop by the cabin with a well if night fell before they reached the next town. Sheriff Amos Crowley of Dent County was not a man given to superstition. Thick-shouldered and graying at the temples, he had survived the war and a dozen frontier skirmishes after. He believed in evidence, not whispers. But when Margaret Bell's sister arrived in tears, clutching the last letter she had received, a letter that mentioned two kind brothers who offered me cool water and a bed by the fire, Crowley felt something shift in his gut. He rode out alone at first, telling no one his suspicions. The cabin stood quiet in the afternoon light, smoke lifting lazily from a chimney. Caleb greeted him at the door with an easy nod. Silas remained inside, seated at the table, mending a leather strap. "Sheriff," Caleb said, as though he had expected him. "Fine day for a ride." Crowley dismounted slowly, scanning the yard. A stack of chopped wood. Two sturdy horses tied beneath a leanter. No sign of struggle. No discarded belongings. The well sat a short distance from the cabin, its wooden cover half drawn back, rope and bucket coiled neatly. Had some travelers passed through these past months? Crowley asked. "A fair few," Caleb replied. "Spring brings movement." "You recall a woman named Margaret Bell?" Caleb's brow furrowed slightly, as if searching memory. "Can't say that I do. We don't always ask names." Silas's eyes flicked up at that, then down again. Crowley requested to look around. Caleb agreed without hesitation, stepping aside. The cabin's interior was sparse but orderly. 2 bunks, a table, shelves lined with jars of preserved vegetables and salted meat. A rifle mounted above the hearth. No obvious signs of violence. No hidden bloodstains that Crowley could see. When he asked to inspect the well, Caleb obliged with a small gesture of his hand. The sheriff approached the circular opening and peered down. Sunlight struck water perhaps 20 feet below, reflecting a pale shimmer up the stone-lined shaft. It looked deep but ordinary. "You draw from it often?" Crowley asked. "Every day," Silas answered quietly from behind him. "Never runs dry." Crowley left with no proof, only unease. The brothers had been cooperative. The cabin revealed nothing. Yet as he rode back through the trees, He could not shake the feeling that he had stood at the edge of something vast and unseen. Summer brought more loss. A travelling watch salesman named Edgar Pike vanished after boasting in a tavern about the gold pieces he carried. 2 farmhands seeking work disappeared within a week of each other. The pattern grew impossible to ignore. Crowley gathered statements from anyone who had passed along that road. Again and again, the Harlan cabin surfaced in recollections. Kind men, free water, a safe place to sleep. The sheriff returned, this time with 2 deputies. The brothers received them with the same calm hospitality. If they were troubled by the repeated visits, they did not show it. "We've done nothing but help those who come to our door," Caleb insisted. Crowley ordered a more thorough search. They examined the barn, sifted through ash in the hearth, probed the surrounding woods for shallow graves. Days passed with nothing found. The ground was rocky and resistant, leaving little room for easy burial. No fresh mounds of earth, no scraps of clothing caught on bramble. On the 3rd day, one of the deputies mentioned a sour smell near the well. Crowley knelt and inhaled. There was, beneath the clean scent of water, a faint rot, difficult to distinguish from damp stone but present nonetheless. "Lower me," Crowley said. They tied a rope around his waist. Caleb and Silas stood nearby, faces unreadable. As Crowley descended, boots braced against the slick wall, the light narrowed above him. The air cooled, heavy with mineral dampness. Halfway down, he noticed grooves carved into the stone, not natural, but deliberate, as if something heavy had been dragged along the interior repeatedly. When his boots touched the water's surface, he sucked in a breath. It was deeper than it had appeared. He plunged his hands into the cold and felt along the submerged wall. At first, only stone and silt. Then something softer. Fabric. He pulled, and a shred of cloth surfaced, dark and rotting. "Bring me up," he called, voice echoing strangely. Once above, he examined the scrap. Even waterlogged, the pattern was visible, faded blue with small white flowers. Margaret Bell's sister had described her dress in detail. Crowley felt his jaw tighten. The brothers did not run. They did not protest as Crowley ordered the well drained. It took hours, buckets hauled up and poured out, water soaking into thirsty ground. As the level dropped, the smell intensified, no longer deniable. When the water finally receded enough to reveal the bottom, the truth lay exposed in a tangle of pale shapes. Bones. Human bones, layered and intertwined. A silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk. Crowley stared down into the pit. Skulls tilted at unnatural angles. Ribs collapsed inward. Fragments of boots, buckles, a rusted watch chain. The well that never ran dry had been fed by more than a spring. Caleb's expression did not change. Silas closed his eyes briefly, as if in relief. They were taken into custody without resistance. Under questioning, they maintained their innocence at first, claiming bandits must have used the well to dispose of bodies. But the grooves along the stone, the lack of defensive wounds on many skeletons later examined by a county doctor, told another story. Several skulls bore fractures consistent with blunt force from above. Some bones showed marks suggesting they had been weighted down. It was Silas who broke. "They trusted us," he whispered during the 3rd night in jail. "They always trusted us." According to his confession, the plan had formed slowly. After the war, they had struggled to survive. Crops failed. Trade was scarce. One winter, a traveler had died of fever in their cabin, clutching a purse of coins. Desperation had eclipsed morality. They buried him near the well and used his money to last the season. The next time opportunity presented itself, it came easier. They learned to strike at night, once guests slept heavily from food and exhaustion. A blow to the head. Quick. Efficient. Bodies dragged to the well, dropped into darkness. The water masked the scent for a time, and the depth concealed evidence. They kept valuables, sold horses in distant towns under false names. Each act numbed them further, until killing became as routine as drawing water. Crowley listened without interruption, his face carved from stone. "How many?" he asked. Silas's eyes filled with something that might have been regret. "I stopped counting after 20. The trial drew crowds from miles around. Newspapers from St. Louis sent reporters eager to recount the horror of the Ozark well murders. Caleb remained defiant, insisting Silas had acted alone, that he himself had been unaware. But testimony from merchants who recognized goods sold by the brothers, combined with physical evidence recovered from the well, sealed their fate. They were sentenced to hang in the autumn of 1873. On the morning of the execution, a heavy fog clung to the town square. Caleb stared at the gathered faces with cold detachment. Silas searched the crowd as though expecting to find someone he recognized among the dead. When the trapdoors opened, the crowd gasped as one. Justice, frontier style, swift and final. Yet even after their deaths, unease lingered in the Ozarks. The well was filled with stone and sealed. The cabin left to decay. Travelers resumed the road eventually, though few passed without glancing toward the clearing where kindness had once been offered so freely. Sheriff Crowley kept a ledger in his office listing the identified victims. 32 names confirmed through belongings and missing persons reports. Others remained unknown, bones too damaged, items too eroded to trace. The true number would likely never be known. Years later, when Crowley himself lay dying, he spoke quietly to his son. "Evil doesn't always look like a wolf," he said. "Sometimes it offers you water." Long after the cabin collapsed and the forest reclaimed the clearing, stories persisted. Children dared each other to approach the sealed well. Hunters claimed that on certain nights, when the air was thick and still, they could hear faint echoes rising from beneath the earth, not screams, but the hollow splash of something falling into deep water. Whether those sounds were memory or imagination hardly mattered. What remained was the lesson carved into the region's history, that trust, once given freely, can be turned into a weapon, that the line between sanctuary and slaughterhouse can be thinner than a cabin wall, and that in the quietest corners of the wilderness, evil can wait patiently, smiling, with a bucket of cool, clear water. The winter after the execution came down hard on Dent County, as if the land itself meant to bury what had happened beneath snow and silence. The town square where Caleb and Silas Harlan had met their end stood empty most days, wind dragging thin sheets of ice across the wooden boards of storefronts. People tried to move on. They repaired fences, mended roofs, married, buried, planted. But the well in the Ozarks did not loosen its grip on their thoughts. Sheriff Amos Crowley had overseen the sealing of it himself. Wagon after wagon of stone had been hauled up the narrow road, dumped into the shaft until it could hold no more. Lime was poured in. Timber was laid across the mouth and hammered down. Crowley had watched every step, jaw tight, as if brute force could silence memory. It did not. In early January of 1874, a trapper named Ellis Boone stumbled into town with frostbitten fingers and a look that unsettled even the saloon's most hardened drinkers. He claimed he had camped a mile from the old Harlan clearing. In the dead of night, he said, he heard the steady creak of rope under strain, the unmistakable sound of a bucket being lowered into a well. "There ain't no well to draw from," one man muttered. Boone only stared into his tin cup. "That's what I thought," he replied. Crowley dismissed it at first. Trauma lingers. Minds play tricks in the wilderness. Yet the report gnawed at him. Within weeks, 2 more travelers mentioned strange sounds near the sealed site. One swore he saw lantern light flickering where the cabin once stood, though the structure had long since collapsed into rot and scattered boards. Then, in March, a body surfaced. It was found along a shallow bend in the creek half a mile from the clearing, snagged on exposed roots after a thaw swelled the current. The corpse was recent, no more than a week dead. A young man, perhaps 25. Skull fractured at the back. Pockets turned out. Crowley knelt beside him, pulse pounding. The Harlan brothers were gone. The well was sealed. Yet the wound was familiar, precise, and deliberate. The dead man carried no identification, only a folded scrap of paper bearing the words, "Dent County, short road through the hills." The sheriff felt something cold coil in his gut. The county doctor confirmed what Crowley already suspected. The blow to the head matched the pattern seen in many of the exhumed skeletons from the well. Same angle. Same force. Word spread quickly. Panic followed. Some insisted a copycat had emerged, inspired by the notoriety of the case. Others whispered that evil, once planted, does not die so easily. Crowley assembled a small search party and rode back to the clearing. Snow had melted into slush, the forest dripping and raw. The remains of the cabin sagged inward, roof partially collapsed. The sealed well sat in the center like a scar. There were footprints. Fresh. They circled the well, approached the ruined doorway, then vanished into the trees. Crowley crouched, studying the impressions. One set. Heavy boots. A single individual. He followed the trail until dusk forced him back. Whoever it was knew the terrain well, moving confidently through underbrush that would slow most men. Over the following weeks, more unease surfaced. A merchant reported being watched from the tree line while watering his horse near the clearing. A farm boy claimed someone had knocked at his family's door at midnight, asking in a low voice for water. Crowley began to suspect what he had once dismissed, that the Harlan story was larger than two desperate brothers. He revisited Silas's confession, reading by lamplight in his office long after the town slept. One line, nearly overlooked at the time, now burned in his mind. They trusted us. And we learned from someone who trusted us first. At the trial, that statement had been attributed to rambling guilt. Crowley had never pressed further. Now he wished he had. He sought out older residents, those who had lived in the Ozarks before the Harlans arrived. One woman, nearly blind and confined to her bed, recalled a hermit who had occupied the same clearing years prior, a widower named Jonah Creel. A quiet man. Lived alone with a well he claimed was fed by veins of the earth. He said water remembers, she whispered. Said if you fed it, it would feed you back. Crowley felt a prickle along his arms. Records showed Creel had vanished abruptly in 1865. No body was ever found. The land passed briefly through county hands before the Harlan brothers purchased it cheaply. The sheriff rode once more to the clearing, this time alone and armed with more than routine determination. He brought tools and pried loose the timber sealing the well. It took hours to remove enough stone to peer down. Darkness greeted him. He lowered a lantern cautiously. The light flickered against packed rubble. The well remained filled, undisturbed, at least at first glance. Then he saw it. A narrow shaft carved into the side wall just above the stone fill, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Hidden from view unless one descended partway. A secondary passage. Crowley's pulse hammered. He secured a rope and lowered himself until his boots rested atop the packed stone. Bracing carefully, he leaned toward the carved opening and thrust the lantern inside. A tunnel stretched beyond, rough-hewn but deliberate. The air that drifted out was stale and cold. Someone had expanded the well. He crawled forward, lantern scraping stone. The tunnel sloped downward before opening into a cramped chamber carved from earth and rock. And there, arranged with unsettling order, lay recent belongings. A coat, a pair of boots, a leather satchel emptied of contents. The chamber was not old. The walls bore fresh tool marks. Crowley's breath came shallow. The Harlans had not acted alone. Or if they had, someone had continued their work. A sound echoed faintly from deeper within the passage. Not water. Not wind. Footsteps. Crowley extinguished the lantern instinctively, plunging himself into darkness. He listened as the steps drew nearer, careful but unhurried. A figure emerged at the tunnel's mouth, silhouetted by faint light from above. Broad-shouldered. Hat brim low. For one wild instant, Crowley thought he faced a ghost. But ghosts do not breathe. The man froze upon seeing him. Silence thickened. You shouldn't be here, the stranger said calmly. Crowley struck a match, relighting the lantern between them. The face revealed was unfamiliar yet eerily reminiscent. Strong jaw, pale eyes, beard trimmed short. Name? Crowley demanded. The man's mouth curved slightly. Ethan Creel. The surname settled like a weight. Jonah Creel's son, Ethan continued. You hung the wrong men, Sheriff. They were students. Rage flared in Crowley's chest. They confessed. They learned, Ethan corrected. From my father. He discovered long ago what desperation can teach. Travelers come with full pockets and no one to vouch for them. The land swallows questions. Crowley tightened his grip on the lantern handle. And you intend to continue? Ethan shrugged faintly. The road still brings the weary. In that suffocating chamber beneath the sealed well, the truth unfolded with brutal clarity. Jonah Creel had begun the practice years before the Harlans arrived. Whether he mentored them or they uncovered his secret independently mattered little now. The well had never been merely a dumping ground. It had been a system, refined, concealed, expanded. You think killing feeds you? Crowley asked, voice low. Ethan's gaze flickered toward the darkness behind him. It feeds the earth. And the earth feeds us. The madness in his tone was steady, unshaken. Crowley moved first. The confined space erupted in struggle. Lantern crashing, shadows leaping wildly. Fists struck stone. A pistol discharged, deafening in the tunnel. Pain exploded along Crowley's shoulder as he collided with rock. They grappled on the narrow ledge above the filled shaft, boots slipping on grit. Ethan lunged, driving them both toward the opening. Crowley felt the sickening drop behind him. With a final surge born of fury and grief and the weight of every name in his ledger, Crowley shoved. Ethan staggered, arms flailing once before disappearing backward into the shaft. A dull, heavy impact echoed below, followed by silence. Crowley lay gasping, staring up at the circle of distant light. Hours later, deputies hauled him out. They recovered Ethan Creel's broken body from atop the stone fill. Further excavation revealed additional remains in side chambers branching from the tunnel, victims claimed after the Harlan's deaths. The newspapers would later call it the second well discovery. Some argued it proved the brothers had not been solely responsible. Others insisted it changed nothing. Crowley did not care for headlines. He oversaw the destruction personally this time. The entire shaft was collapsed with controlled charges borrowed from a mining crew. Earth caved inward, swallowing the tunnels completely. Trees were felled across the clearing. The road was rerouted permanently. By summer, grass grew where the cabin once stood. The clearing ceased to exist on maps. Yet in quiet moments, Crowley wondered whether evil had truly been buried or merely displaced. The Ozarks were vast. Wells dotted the hills. Travelers would always seek water. Years later, as age bent his spine and silvered his hair fully, Crowley returned one final time to the approximate place where the clearing had been. Forests stood dense and indifferent. No sign remained of timber or stone. He listened. Only wind in the pines. Perhaps that was enough. Or perhaps the land had simply learned to keep its secrets deeper still.